The first rays of a December sunrise slid across the tranquil waters of Pearl Harbor, slipping past swaying palms, over coral walls and sleepy barracks. The Pacific held its breath in that calm, unaware. It was a Sunday morning like many others, sailors polishing decks, civilians drifting through breakfast, children skipping toward twice-a-week church service. Birds chirped, the sea was still. Above all, faith and peace felt absolute. But beneath the surface, gears were turning in distant rooms where war maps were plotted and decisions made. In Tokyo, in Washington, in naval command centers, nuance and ambition intertwined with fear. And when the warplanes appeared black against light, they broke not just ships and lives, but the illusion of safety. Explosions tore the sky. Fire cracked the water. Smoke poured like grief from metal wounds. This is not simply the story of ships sunk or bombs dropped. It is the story of people who never saw it coming. The cook whose shift ended minutes before the first bomb, the pilot who scrambled, the nurse who raced to help the mother who held her child in terror, the young man watching towers collapse. As the shock rippled outward, the world changed. The United States, once hesitant to join war, was dragged in by heartbreak, by duty, by resolve. This is the dagger's sharp turning point. Part 1. Sunday calm before the storm. The sun was a gentle promise on the horizon of Oahu that morning. Long before dawn's first light, shadows lay heavy over the Pacific, cool and inscrutable. Crickets had paused. The air was still. Honolulu slept under a faint orange glow that would soon become gold. But as yet there was no heat, no voices calling out, no urgent stirrings, just the slow breathing of an island at rest. Along the waterfront, fishing boats bobbed lightly in the harbor's arms. Nets rolled and heaped on deck, lanterns dim, the engines silent. On Ford Island, sailors lay in their bunks, some rising, yawning, rubbing sleep from eyes. The smell of salt drifted in from open portholes. On nearby docks, enlisted men in white uniforms went about chore-sweeping wood planks, checking ropes, inspecting holes, disconnected from danger, confident in routine. The Pacific Fleet, proud and vast, stretched out across Battleship Row, Arizona, Missouri, West Virginia, Oklahoma, anchored in placid water, shadows of monumental steel reflecting in stillness. In houses behind palms in suburban Honolulu, the first stirrings of Sunday spread. A woman lit a kerosene lamp, kneading dough for breakfast. Bread in warm ovens, sweet coffee, fruit in bowls, papaya, banana, citrus scent mingled with sea air, carried on a mild breeze. Children, oblivious of conflict, dressed in clean clothes, perhaps bound for church later. Laundry hung on lines, flapping quietly in the breeze. From radios in kitchens came gentle hymn songs. Local Hawaiian stations, the familiar voices of announcers reading weather, shipping dispatches, weekend events. Nothing in tone suggested panic or alarm. At Hickam Field, the United States Army Air Corps had scheduled maintenance. Hangar doors were open to let in light. Mechanics walked among fighters and bombers, checking oil, tuning engines. A pilot sipped black coffee, leaning against the wing of an aircraft, discussing with a comrade whether the training mission later that morning might include formation drills. Over at Kaneo Bay, seaplanes rested on calm water, their pontoons lined by docks. Airfield personnel made rounds, checking fuel lines, washing windshields. Even in the military world, Sunday slackened expectations, less urgency, fewer orders, an extended coffee, a cigarette in the shade. Letters from home opened, read, folded. Tokyo was far away, thick with tension. In diplomatic quarters, translators burned the midnight oil. Warnings crossed channels. Reports of Japanese naval activity, of movements, of fuel shortages, and political pressure. Yet many in Washington and Honolulu did not believe an attack was imminent. Isolationist currents in the US, legal constraints, political caution, all weighed heavily. Naval intelligence, army dispatches, they productively contradicted each other in small ways. The chain of command held its scripts, but there was no alarm. There was belief still in peace by virtue, in treaties, in deterrence. On Oahu, though, there were minor rumors, whispered among radio operators, from ships arriving from Asia. A merchant ship docked the night before had passed on word of radio silence from distant stations. Repairs being done in Southeast Asia, but nothing confirmed. Dock workers shrugged, said it was nothing unusual. Tropical islands had storms, telegram delays, weather interference, tension like a low tide, visible perhaps to those who looked, but mostly submerged. By 7 a.m., islands around Oahu shone under full sunrise. The sky was a broad canvas, lavender to the east, pale rose, the first rays soft on rooftops and coconut palms. In homes near the water, the sound of waves against seawalls, small fishing villages outside Honolulu, Hanoa, Westlock, Pearl City people rising to fish, to shop, to cook. Some boarded trams, horses and wagons creaked over side roads. Hawaii Kai fishermen pushed their boats off reefs. Church bells in some districts calling faithful to Sunday service. Hymns to be sung in wooden pews with stained glass light filtering through. At Pearl Harbor itself, life was both more rigid and more idle. The disciplined hush of naval officers in quarters, Marines standing guard, the shipyards doing what must be done, ropes coiled, steam rising from boilers, fired up for routine tasks, signal flags hoisted, telephone systems humming in stairwells, but nothing suggested the tension of war. The men knew of drills, of readiness, but today was Sunday. The stevedores unloading supplies, workers making repairs. Near Ford Island, mess halls smelled of eggs and bacon. Orders for eggs over easy, toast, strong coffee. Among women in the naval families, breakfast tables bore sweet rolls and marmalade. Conversation of last night's radio program or neighborhood gossip. A woman across the way folded laundry, paused to watch the harbor, saw faint lights of warships in silhouette, wondered at the calm. Children, some with textbooks, some carrying hymn books for Sunday school, stood on porches, greeting neighbors. Dogs lay in the shade, licking forepaws. At Kaneo Naval Air Station, seaplanes at their moorings, engines cooling from earlier evening maintenance. Some pilots had been up late watching navigation charts, studying maps. They dreamed perhaps of flight, of emergency drills, nothing more. A squadron flight instructor, perhaps, looked across the runway where P by Catalina boats glinted on water. He checked oil levels, cleaned gauges, laughed with an assistant about a misplaced bolt. The come morning sunshine, the promise of a calm day with nothing more serious than paperwork and drill. Some of the men had thoughts of home, letters from partners, food from distant farms, pictures torn from magazines. One sailor clasped favorite locket, a photograph, before placing it in his jacket. A young Marine trimmed grass around a barracks, humming quietly, singing in time with his steps. The sky overhead was open, so open that clouds distant and scattered seemed safe, decorative. At Fort Shafter, Army officers held morning inspections, tropical uniforms pressed, boots polished. Staff moved through thick humidity, sweating but unhurried. They reviewed supply manifests, exercise schedules. Some wished they could be on other islands, Maui Kauai. Some joked about the afternoon heat, the politics in Washington, but discipline held them steady. The Japanese fleet, however, approached in silence, a ghost armada slipping across thousands of miles of water, carriers far to the northwest, destroyers escorting, submarines shadowing tight formations hidden under radio silence. Planes were being fueled, torpedoes loaded in hidden hangars, navigators plotting courses, bombardiers calibrating bombs by moonlight behind closed doors. But in Oahu, news did not reach that level. For most, the day wore the mask of Sunday routines. In Honolulu, stores had opened, grocers, markets. Hawaiians sold fresh fruit, fish from early catch, small boats docking bringing miso, rice, canned goods. Tourists few, but presents sailed in for the morning. Cameras, postcards in hand. The Waikiki beaches, under pale sunlight, had early bathers, among them surfers catching small waves, children chasing crabs, vendors called to passers-by, offering leis, shell necklaces. The music of ukuleles drifted from open windows, laughter, church choir practice in some corners. Weather was benign, clear sky, mild trade winds from the northeast, no storm warnings, no atmospheric disturbance. Radar, though in place in small numbers, malfunctioning or inadequately monitored. Some radar screens blipped with planes approaching from the northwest, but those officers assumed friendly flights or regular patrols, mistook early signals for false alarms. The logic of threat could not bridge the distance from suspicion to urgency. Time drifted toward 7:30 a.m. Messages floated in from Washington. Diplomatic cables intercepted radio traffic. Some in intelligence believed Japan might soon act in some fashion, but operations directives were absent. No orders to heighten alert. In command posts, officers stared at maps, marked ship positions. At the Navy Yard, workers polished brass and cleaned decks. Ship masts caught light, the golden rays reflecting off rivets, portholes. The contrast of gleaming metal and still water held an almost sacred beauty. Then a young sailor on watch at Opana radar station north of Oahu saw Blipstu 3, maybe more slowly emerging on the horizon. He alerted decision points, but the signal was weak. It was early. By protocol, confirmation required. He flagged it, the worry passing upward in channels that considered but dismissed. No jet trails, no fighter scrambled. The world waited, not knowing time itself had already begun counting. In bedrooms on the base, men made final adjustments to uniforms. Buttons tightened, insignia checked. A father kissed his children goodbye if he had leave. A mother pressed a handkerchief over her lips as she stepped outside into dawn light. Pews in Christian churches in Honolulu would soon fill. Hymns of gratitude and hope recited. The air smelled of salt, citrus, honeysuckle. Even among Japanese-American families on the island, life seemed normal. Parents preparing breakfast of rice and tea or local foods. Children off to school uniforms. Some speaking quietly of distant relatives. News from Japan. Few imagined that within the span of an hour, their lives might become dangerous in ways unthinkable. Caught between two worlds, loyalty and suspicion. In seconds, the air shattered, and the storm began. Part 2. Fire and steel over Battleship Row. The sky above Pearl Harbor was still, blushing with morning light when the first shadows fell. Not clouds, not birds, machines. They came from the Northlow, fast and furious. Their silhouettes darkened the sun. Their engines screamed like war gods descending. The first Japanese wave struck at 7:48 a.m. The quiet of Sunday morning shattered into flame and steel. It began not with a warning, but with an eruption, the detonation of torpedoes launched across the calm harbor, their wakes slicing the water toward unsuspecting giants. The battleships were moored peacefully in a line at Battleship Row. Arizona, Oklahoma, West Virginia, California, Tennessee, Maryland, each one a monument of American naval might. Each one suddenly turned into a coffin of twisted steel. The USS Arizona was hit almost immediately. An armor-piercing bomb dropped straight into her forward magazine. The result was apocalyptic. A fireball ripped through her midsection, and in less than 10 minutes, she was gone, broken in half, burning from the inside, engulfed in a pillar of black smoke that soared into the heavens. Over 1,100 men were lost in that single moment. Many never saw it coming. Most never stood a chance. Nearby, the USS Oklahoma absorbed multiple torpedoes in rapid succession. Her great hull rocked violently before rolling onto her side. She capsized in the water, trapping hundreds of sailors below decks. Screams echoed from inside. Men clawed at steel. Some were rescued days later. Many were not. The sea became their grave. Anti-aircraft fire sputtered to life, but it was too little, too late. Most gunners had been caught off guard. their weapons unmanned or their ammunition locked away. Pilots in the skies above swooped down in tight formations, launching wave after wave of death. Torpedoes sliced through water. Bombs dropped with precision. Bullets sprayed the decks of every ship and shoreline within reach. The USS West Virginia was struck 7 times, taking torpedoes along her port side. She listed and began to sink slowly, smoke pouring from her hull. On deck, sailors fought back, some with rifles, some with fists, some dragging the wounded across fiery steel. On the USS California, explosions rocked the ship as fires erupted below deck. She flooded slowly, crew members struggling to keep her upright, but she too sank into the harbor, taking scores of men with her. The Tennessee and Maryland were hit as well, though less severely. Their guns opened fire, tracing black arcs of smoke across the sky. The USS Pennsylvania, dry-docked and unable to move, became a target for bombs. Flames licked her stern. Sailors scrambled across the gangways, throwing hoses, carrying the wounded, returning fire. But the sky belonged to the enemy. The Japanese dive bombers screamed down like hawks, sirens wailing, unleashing chaos and fury. Their bombs tore through hangars, barracks, airfields. At Hickam Field, aircraft exploded before they could get airborne. Caneo, Wheeler, Ewell were hit. Planes burned where they sat. The defenders never stood a chance. Amid the destruction, acts of heroism flickered like stars through smoke. On the USS Nevada, a young ensign took command as his ship came under fire. Rather than stay moored, the Nevada broke away from Battleship Row, heading for the open channel. Her engines thundered, her guns roared, but she became a magnet for enemy fire. Dive bombers descended on her like wolves. Explosions rocked her deck. Still, she pressed forward, a defiant spear through the smoke. She nearly made it. To avoid blocking the harbor's exit, the Nevada was deliberately run aground, her bow wedged into shallow water, listing, smoking, but not sunk. Her defiance would become legend. All around her, the harbor boiled. The water churned with oil and blood. Men swam through flames, some dragging the injured with them, others pushing lifeboats or clinging to debris. Fires spread across the water's surface, fueled by ruptured fuel tanks. The ocean itself seemed to burn. Divers would later speak of what they found beneath the waves. Darkness, silence. Then, taps on steel. A man alive, trapped inside a sunken ship. A whisper through water. Some were rescued. Many were not. By 8:40 a.m., the first wave began to withdraw. But the horror was not over. The second wave arrived just before 9 o'clock a.m. More than 160 additional planes screamed across the harbor. They struck the already wounded. They sought the survivors. They targeted dry docks, fuel depots, and every remaining aircraft. More bombs fell. More ships were hit. The USS Shore exploded in dry dock. Its bow hurled into the air like a cannonball. The air turned orange. The ground shook. Flak peppered the sky, but the defense was desperate, disorganized. Gun crews fired blindly through smoke. Many of them had never trained for real combat. Some used machine guns mounted on jeeps. Others fired rifles at passing planes. In some places, civilians joined in, grabbing weapons, fighting back, doing whatever they could. The second wave's damage was more surgical, more focused. They finished what the first wave started. The flames intensified. The smoke grew thicker. The harbor became a furnace. Then suddenly it ended. By 10 a.m. the attackers were gone. The sky was empty again, but the silence had returned, changed. The island was not the same. The ships were not the same. The people were not the same. Battleship Row was a graveyard. The Arizona burned continuously for 2 days. The Oklahoma rested on her side, motionless, a steel tomb. The California and West Virginia sat sunken in the shallows. All told, 8 battleships were hit. 4 were sunk. Others were damaged, crippled, or burning. Nearly 20 naval vessels had been destroyed or disabled. Across the island, over 180 aircraft were destroyed. Airfields reduced to ash. Hundreds of men killed before they ever reached their planes. The pilots never got their chance, and the toll in blood: over 2,400 Americans killed, nearly 1,200 wounded, fathers, sons, brothers, and friends all gone in under 2 hours. The fire still smoldered, the oil still burned on the water, the cries of the wounded echoed from the hills. The harbor was a war zone now. In the days that followed, the survivors would become rescuers. They pulled bodies from twisted wreckage. They cut through steel to find their friends. They manned pumps, patched holes, and began the grim work of salvaging what was left. Some men returned to the same ships they'd nearly died on. Others slept on the dock, unwilling to go home, unwilling to rest. There were too many names not yet spoken, too many faces missing from the mess hall, too many helmets floating on the harbor like empty thoughts. But through the wreckage, a new resolve emerged. The fire had not destroyed them. It had forged something terrible and sacred. Anger, determination, unity. Pearl Harbor was no longer just a port. It was a symbol, an oath, a promise carved in flame. America would rise. It would answer. And the world would never forget where it all began here. In these waters, beneath this sky, among these ships of steel and men of flesh. Part 3. Aftermath. In the ashes. A nation remade. The smoke didn't lift for days. It hung low over the harbor like a shroud, clinging to the broken skeletons of warships, swallowing the sunlight. The air was heavy with the stink of oil, fire, and death. The once peaceful waters of Pearl Harbor had turned into a dark mirror, reflecting nothing but ruin. Everything was quiet now, but not the kind of silence that comes with peace. This was the silence that follows catastrophe, the haunted stillness left in war's wake. Men moved through it like shadows. Sailors, scorched and oil-covered, dragged the wounded. Others wandered, dazed, their eyes glassy, their hands trembling. Some wept openly, some didn't speak at all. The USS Arizona burned for 2 days straight. Her explosion had split her open, and over 1,000 men were lost with her, most never even making it above deck. The blast had been so violent that her forward magazine had gone up in a single instant, a flash of light, then fire, then silence. Now she lay in the shallow harbor, broken and bleeding, leaking oil into the water drop by drop. The sailors would come to call it the tears of the Arizona. They still weep today. Divers worked around the clock, cutting into hulls, listening for tapping from within. Some men were rescued. Others were too deep, too late. The USS Oklahoma had rolled over and trapped hundreds of men inside. For days, faint sounds echoed from within her steel corpse. Some were saved. Most were not. Medical teams were overwhelmed. Blood covered the floors of makeshift clinics and crowded hospitals. Navy nurses, many fresh from training, worked without sleep, stitching wounds, comforting the dying. Priests walked the rows of bodies with oil and prayer. Some men died whispering names of mothers, wives, brothers. Others died screaming. At night, the fires flickered like torches across the island. The skyline of Honolulu was lit by flames. Even the stars seemed dimmer. And then came the news. On December 8, 1941, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt addressed Congress in a voice that carried through every American home. Yesterday, he said, December 7, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. His words struck like thunder. They echoed across the plains, through the cities, into every farmhouse and factory. Congress declared war on Japan that very day. Germany and Italy followed. In less than a week, America found itself at war across 2 oceans. The sleeping giant had awoken in the mainland. Lines formed outside recruiting offices. Boys barely out of high school volunteered in waves. Some forged papers to enlist early. Others kissed their families goodbye before disappearing into uniforms and barracks. Across the country, a quiet rage boiled beneath the surface grief, transformed into resolve. Flags appeared in windows. Newspapers ran photos of burning ships. Radios played updates non-stop. Churches held vigils. Mothers wrote letters that would never be read. Every town now had someone in the fight or someone lost to it, but no place felt it like Hawaii. The island transformed overnight. Martial law was declared. Civilians were ordered off the streets. Barbed wire was stretched across beaches. Anti-aircraft guns were mounted on hotel roofs. Police officers carried rifles. Military checkpoints appeared at every corner. Suspicion spread faster than fire. Japanese American citizens, many born in Hawaii, many who had served in the military, were arrested, interrogated, watched. Some were taken from their homes. Others lost businesses, land, everything. Families that had lived peacefully for generations suddenly found themselves labeled enemies. Loyalty was questioned. Trust was shattered. For many, the war came not just from the sky but from within. Still, even in fear, the island held together. Communities organized food drives. Hospitals overflowed with volunteers. Teachers became nurses. Civilians helped clear wreckage, bury the dead, rebuild what they could. The people of Oahu, wounded, frightened, furious, rose from the smoke and stood tall. At Pearl Harbor, the work of salvage began. Divers descended daily, braving sharp metal and pitch black to recover bodies, clear wreckage, and try to bring the harbor back to life. The USS Nevada, badly damaged but still afloat, was towed to safety and would eventually fight again. The West Virginia was refloated, repaired, and returned to war. The California rose from the mud and rejoined the fleet, but the Arizona remained, too damaged to save, too sacred to move. Her wreck would remain in place forever, a tomb, forever a reminder. More than 1,000 men still rest within her. She would become the most sacred war grave in American history. Years later, a white memorial would be built over her, suspended just above the water. Tourists would visit, veterans would weep, families would throw flowers into the sea, and the oil would still rise, drop by drop. Pearl Harbor had been attacked, but not destroyed, and America, bloodied, furious, had found its voice. The war that followed was savage. In the Pacific, American forces clawed their way island by island. Midway, Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Iwo Jima. The names became sacred and feared. Men died by the thousands. Heat, jungle, disease, bullets, bombs, it didn't matter. The enemy was relentless. So were the Americans. And at every step, they remembered where it started. On the beaches of Normandy, on the decks of carriers in the Coral Sea, in frozen foxholes in Belgium, Pearl Harbor burned in the back of every soldier's mind. The war was fought with purpose, with fury, with memory. America had changed. Factories ran 24 hours a day. Women filled the workforce. Children collected scrap metal. Ration books became part of daily life. A generation that had grown up in the Great Depression now marched toward fire, carrying the hopes of a nation on their backs. And the names of the dead, those lost on December 7th, were never far. They were carved into marble, spoken at ceremonies, etched into letters sent home from distant fronts. They were remembered not just as victims, but as the spark that lit the fire. When the war finally ended in 1945, after nearly 4 years of blood and fire, the world was forever changed. The United States emerged as a superpower. The atomic age had begun. The world had been broken and remade. But in Hawaii, Pearl Harbor still stood. The rusting holes were gone, razed or scrapped. The harbor was rebuilt. The ships were replaced. But beneath the waves, the scars remain. The wreck of the Arizona still bled oil. The waters still whispered. And every December, people came to remember. Survivors returned, older now, walking slowly, wearing medals on their chests. They stood at the rail of the Arizona Memorial and saluted the friends they had lost. Some asked to have their ashes returned to the ship, to go home one last time. Divers carried them down, releasing them into the black silence, into the arms of their shipmates. Even today, the air feels different there, heavier, quieter, as if the harbor itself remembers. Because Pearl Harbor is not just a place, it is a moment frozen in time, a line in the sand, a reminder of what happens when the world sleeps and the storm comes in the night. It was not just the start of a war, it was the death of innocence, the birth of resolve, and the making of a nation that would never be the same. Until next time, stay safe, and see you in the next history.